Well, welcome to the Week in Sports Cars, and it is another listener question-led show. If you tuned in for last week's show, you heard Marshall was losing his voice. It came back, it's gone again. So instead of MP, we've got another guest presenter here. We'll introduce him in just a moment. Before then, an opportunity to be introduced to our sponsors for Twisk.
Time to say a big thank you to our show partners on the Marshall Pruitt podcast, starting with Pfaff Technologies, build-to-print composites manufacturing company. They're specializing in medium to large-scale automotive, motorsports, and military applications. Visit pfafftechnologies.com. It's P-F-A-F-F technologies.com to learn more about their services and how they can benefit your business. Next, it's the Justice Brothers, makers of premium additives, lubricants, and cleaners, been servicing the automotive and motorsports industries for more than 85 years, with victories in all of the biggest North American motor races, including the Indianapolis 500, the 24 Hours of Daytona. The Justice Brothers products are truly race-proven. Learn about their vast history and range of offerings at justicebrothers.com. If you're fond of awesome motor racing collectibles, including Pfaff Motorsports McLaren gear and goodies, pay a visit to torontomotorsports.com. And finally, we have a new online merchandise home for the podcast, thepruittstore.com, where all the show stickers, models, the racing memorabilia I'm trying to sell and put towards our fund to buy a house is now live and rocking. thepruittstore.com.
Well, as always, thanks to all the fine people behind the organisations that make this happen. It'll be no major surprise. Our special guest this week is my good friend and close colleague, Stephen Kilbey. Stephen, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, Graham. How are you?
I'm feeling very Christmassy.
Yeah, you look Christmassy.
I know. This Santa's hat is getting a bit itchy.
It's the beard as well.
Sorry about that. Yeah. Yeah, scratchy. Anyway, what we're going to do, we said we'd do this at the end of last week's show. MP voice was failing, so it's reasonably short, snappy Week in Sports Cars show. We're hoping, if MP is feeling up to it and better, that we will do a kind of yearly review show, and I have plans to chuck out some social media posts asking our listeners to give us a few ideas of how to shape that as well. So watch out on our usual channels, on Facebook, on Twitter. I'm still going to call it that. I refuse to call it the other name. And also through our friends on the RWC, completely forgotten what it's
Reddit
called.
group.
Reddit, not the Reddit group.
Reddit subreddit.
No.
The
other one.
No?
No, it's not Reddit.
RWC?
Discord.
Oh, RWC on Discord.
Yes, indeed. So that's where you'll be able to see the call for action, if you like, in the next few days. But we thought what we'd do for the next 40 minutes or so is run through the remaining questions you gave us last week, with thanks to all of you that contributed and to Daniel Summersgill, as always, our faithful mate who puts these things together. Merry Christmas to you, Daniel, and to everybody out there too. So without further ado, and why would you have further ado if there's options not to do so, let's crack on. What are you going to bowl at me first, like a frenzied gibbon?
Yeah, the first ball I'm going to bowl at you, Graham, is concerning the future of boutique manufacturers in the WEC. First question comes from El Loco, who writes, with no Van Wall or his Otto Fraschini in the WEC in 2025, with more manufacturers to come, is there any possibility to see these cars on the grid in 2026 or 2027, or will we never see them again since they've ended their programmes?
Well, I think the question is until the first manufacturers end their programmes. With the two-car mandate put in place for sound reasons, but of course that means it's more challenging entry point. It's difficult to see that you'd find what a truly boutique manufacturer stepping in at this stage. Not that there's a lot of room for them. It's fair to say. Now, we've reasonably speaking had three, haven't we? Glickenhaus, Jim Glickenhaus's team, putting in the cars for those first 2 years and providing great bolster to competition for the established order in those first 2 years. Gave us all something to cheer on against the kind of bridging programme from Alpine and against the Toyota programme. Then coming in came Van Wall, and through the shambles that was. That's come and gone again, and yeah, we saw the stories being written coming into 2025. We're bringing 2 cars. We won't bring 2 cars unless you tell us we've definitely got the entries. We've tested it. We haven't tested it. There's updates. There's no updates. There's a new engine.
Didn't happen, did it?
It's vaporware. At the level at which it's going to be required for a World Championship programme, that was never going to be back in any kind of meaningful sense. So do I expect to see Glickenhaus back? No, Jimmy's doing other things, particularly his zero-emission programmes with the cars and trucks he's developing. Will Van Wall be back? Can I say this out loud? Don't care. Is a straight and honest answer. Never was a serious prospect here. And frankly, there's a lot more positive things to be talking about than the undeniably fairly pretty car, but utterly hopeless. So beyond that, we then get to Isotta Fraschini. And what can you say? They did tell us in the early parts of this year that they would step up and do the 2 cars. I think the commercial and financial reality was they were never close in terms of the required investment to make that happen. And that's become very obvious with what we've seen in terms of them fading away, and frankly what we've heard in the background about where that programme actually was commercially through its short existence. Car was fine. Actually there were moments, right up to the very end where it did not look bad. And you sort of felt that with a bit more investment and maybe, a couple of experienced drivers capable of helping the development for that car, that they could have broken through. Could they be back? I have to tell you, with a load of the prospects that we've got in the background looking for opportunities to join the WEC, not a single one of them has reasonably said to us, we could always have a crack at investing in that Isotta Fraschini programme. Not one.
No.
And I think with sadness, because I do like the plucky underdog, I think those 3 are gone and will not be back. Is there a prospect of something coming along? Never say never.
This is what Danny Morgan asked. He says, will we ever see a boutique manufacturer enter hypercar again?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, you and I have written about the Rodin Motorsport prospect coming in, and they're one of, frankly, surprisingly few now manufacturers looking for a way into, not manufacturers, teams looking for a way into the FI World Endurance Championship in the kind of privateer ranks. Most of the teams that told us they were looking for a prospect of doing it are really now making it clear that it's going to be a factory back program or nothing, because the big thing that has changed since hypercar was first mooted and where we are now through the kind of COVID years and the supply chain challenges is budgets have gone sky high. Certainly not LMP1 sky high, let's not be ridiculous, but certainly way, way more than they were originally envisaged. Yeah. And I think reasonably speaking, the entry point to get cars into the WEC to a level at which it's now going to be required are well into 8 figures UK, and that's a lot of money to spend if you're selling a handful of cars a year, as most boutique manufacturers do. The only other prospect is to do something like Aston Martin are doing. And okay, Aston Martin, you could say as a boutique manufacturer, it's a little bit more significant in terms of the numbers than that, which is to look and see whether or not there is the prospect of marketing directly with a product you can monetize. In other words, a car that can actually hit the track and can find people willing to invest a 7-figure sum per car in a car that looks remarkably like, or goes remarkably like, the cars that are actually entered into the FI World Endurance Championship. Is there something in prospect there? Might be. Not immediately.
Let's talk wind tunnels. So Edward Beresford asks, with the Sauber wind tunnel out of action now, how can the OCO homologate cars, and that's the FIA, it should be as well, especially with the new Aston, as it can't compare to its existing cars? Yes, you can use wind shear, but wouldn't it give different results? And what effect would it have on jokers for existing cars too?
I think the answer, and this came from a couple of conversations at the recent Daytona test that I was at, is so Valkyrie's got a problem in that it's had to be homologated at both, okay, which is not unusual. Any car that runs in both the World Endurance Championship and the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship has to be homologated at both. But if I'm right, and WC and ACO people, if you're listening, please do tell me if I'm wrong. I think I'm right that when that Sauber wind tunnel is upgraded, we don't go back there. I think everything goes to windshear. So pretty much the last car that we'll see double homologation, wind tunnel homologation, is going to be the Valkyrie. Now, that's not as big a problem as it sounds, because here's the thing. All of the LMDH cars that compete in both championships have already been to both. The next car along that will go to both is going to be the Genesis. And by that time, I'm pretty certain that we won't be sending cars to Sauber. And by that stage as well, we already know where the cars are in terms of wind shear results, because all the cars that are going to be up against it are going to have already been there, with the exception of the LMH cars, and they will eventually cycle through as their upgrades come on stream. Yeah. So the reality, I believe, is that wind shear will become the de facto home of both hypercar and GTP. That Sauber, as I understand it, will come offline for homologation for the FI World Endurance Championship, and that will come out in the wash as we go forward in the months and the years to follow.
So, GT Gamers up next. Could the delays with homologation of the Valkyrie LMH be attributed to the high influx of parties using the wind shear facility at IMSA, WEC and NASCAR due to the wind tunnel renovations at Sauber?
It's more of the same, isn't it? I think, there are a variety of challenges for any car coming through homologation. Yes and no. I think, certainly in talking to a couple of people very close to that programme, wind tunnel was not very far from the top of the list of things that they were saying as a challenge. In terms of delays to homologation, if by that you mean that they're not going to be doing Daytona, I think that's elective. I think they've just decided they're not going to start the programme with a 24-hour race. And I sort of get that. It's a straight answer. I don't think that's to do necessarily with a delay in homologation. I think they've just decided not to do it. And I'm actually sort of surprised that more people in the recent past haven't made that decision with brand new race cars, because it is one hell of a place to go. So we will see the global debut in Qatar on
a billiard table.
Absolutely. In Qatar for the FI World Endurance Championship, and then they go and do something that's even more difficult than Daytona at Sebring. So it's already a challenging start to the season, but I don't think the wind tunnel issue has been the principal reason behind it. I think the principal reason behind it is they've just decided not to do that.
One more time. Yeah. Any more time they can
get. But bear in mind, the key thing, and you unlock the other part of it, which is they'll homologate it at a point that they're happy with the package. Because if they don't do that, you get into the problem that Lamborghini hit squarely, which is they were forced by their own the demands that only they placed upon themselves in terms of where and when they wanted to debut the car. They forced themselves into a position where they homologated a car in non-optimal form, and now they're paying the price for that.
So kind of sticking with the Aston Martin theme here, question about Heart of Racing from Velonerd.
I wonder if Velonerd is a nerd about velos, bikes.
Yeah, bikes. Heart of Racing announcing its driver lineup for the GTD Pro Class Daytona. Is it a big clue about its its Valkyrie lineup?
Very probably. I think, what we heard from Ian James at the launch of the Valkyrie LMH, what seems a long time ago now, was that he expected that it would be principally from talent from within Heart of Racing's roster of drivers and talent from within Aston Martin's Racing's roster of drivers. You and I are aware of a couple of names that have not been out there yet that have been in the mix for this across both programs, and you'll see some other names inked in to both IMSA and WEC programs as time goes forward. But I don't think there's going to be major surprises. That anybody that thinks all of a sudden there's going to be 3 guys from Formula One in there, they're not. It's they know where they want to be, and they're investing in talent that they've already invested in already, and are sure that these guys are good race drivers, good team players, do not need to be kind of rewired to put themselves into the Heart of Racing squad, and people who know the personalities, the working methods, and some of the technology involved here. So I don't think we're going to expect any massive surprises there.
Dan McGrath asks, he wants to ask about noise. So he's talking about the Valkyrie, and he says, is there any insight onto why the Valkyrie seems to have silencers or mufflers fitted since it started running in the US? The initial tests in the UK seemed to be a bit of an unmuffled / much louder car, whereas the car that was running at Daytona was virtually silent running with the other cars, more like a jet fighter whoosh than a scream. Well, you were there, Graham. You heard it with your own ears. Was it like that?
No, it wasn't. It was louder than perhaps some of the microphones, including the ones that I pointed at it, led you to believe. It was not, however, that kind of ear-splitting, gut-wrenching V12 blare that we were used to with DBR9 or with the Lola Aston Martin. What can I say here, Dan? Watch this space. And I'm saying nothing more than that. So there are a couple of signs that it will not remain that way. And I hope that when we get to Qatar, certainly by the time you get to Sebring, that you'll be hearing something somewhat different.
I've got it on good authority. It's going to be much louder. And you weren't there, bizarrely.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, I'm sort of keeping my cards close to my chest.
So am I.
So
we'll have to wait until we turn the recorder off to reveal who we'll be speaking to then, won't we?
Well, I read somewhere, I think it was on Reddit, actually, that Gabe Newell actually responded to a fan asking this very question. And his answer was...
Buy a Steam Deck.
Working on it.
Yeah.
I don't think there's going to be a great deal of resistance to it. So a bit of hashtag watch this space.
Craig Johnson, we're going to talk about aero racing now. So there's some new hot shoes there, racing in Spike in the LMP2 car. Is this Hyatt and Jeanette's attempt to show companies like Genesis and Hyundai and unnamed manufacturers looking at GTP and LMDH that aero racing should be a top contender for a factory effort, or is it just that PJ and Gunnar want to win?
It's not just that they want to win, they absolutely want to win, and indeed, of course, they have been winning with the GTD Pro effort last year. PJ is pushing very hard. He'll be racing as well in the European Le Mans Series this year. They are a team with no little ambition. Do they want to move onwards and upwards to the top class? 1,000,000% they do. When might that happen? When they're good and ready. I've known Gunnar for pretty much the whole of my reporting career, and I'd still have to struggle to not remember him as being a teenager. Then you sort of think, actually now he's something of a veteran. And he's a smart guy.
You're old.
I'm really old and fat. And think what impresses me every time I speak to Gunnar is the layers of thought behind the moves that they're making. It would be really easy to look at aero racing and go, yeah, they're the guys that paint the cars in a cutesy way. But there's good reasons behind that. Beyond just the headline of why that selection was made, it's then how you activate that. But it goes way deeper than that. These guys are working really hard to build something for the long term. This is not a classic 3 years in, win what we can, done that, tick that box, off we go. There's a business brain, in fact, business brain plural behind this. And that's another hashtag watch this space in a really good way. Is it because I know something? Well, I know a bit more than I can tell you, but there's nothing very specific to wheedle out here. Simply that the level of ambition is pretty much unbounded.
Let's talk about BMW. Stephen Gates says, K-Mag to BMW. What say you? Hashtag me personally. It was amazing to see it come out of the blue. It's a mega move for both the team and the driver. Buckle up for a fun ride. So this is Kevin Magnussen doing WEC and doing Daytona for now.
I think I'm right. He's doing more than Daytona. I think he's doing.
Nice. Is it part of that rotation with the 8
yes,
drivers?
He is.
Yes.
I mean,
yes,
so BMW they've contracted, as in made it smaller, their driver roster. But they're going to make them work harder.
I think we're going to see a lot of manufacturers start to do this.
Yeah.
In the future, like scale back the number of drivers and make them all do more.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, it's cool. It's cool to see Kevin. I mean, we saw him in IMSA, didn't we, before racing with Cadillac, and he's a name that will bring his own set of eyes. It's nice to see an aspirant nation like Denmark finally get a driver in sports car racing.
You know, I mean, Denmark not known for their endurance racing drivers.
No, well, maybe someday. Bit like Genesis, really, with South Korea. Maybe someday.
Maybe someday. Will there be ever a successful?
Imagine a Dane winning Le Mans. Could you imagine? Unbelievable.
Yeah,
unbelievable.
It will happen.
I'm intrigued to know how. In all seriousness, I'm intrigued to see what he can do in that BMW lineup, because that car, as we know, is kind of had peaks and troughs, hasn't it, in both IMSA and WEC, and star power like Kevin Magnussen. There's going to be a bit of pressure on him to, show what he can do.
There's something else I'd say with Kevin.
Formula One journey.
Big admirer of his, and I am keen to see where his focus is going to be now that pretty clearly Formula One is done for him. Because what was clear last time is Formula One wasn't done.
Well, I mean, he was Peugeot for like 10 minutes, wasn't he? And then went.
I think the key here is this is his future, and he's got the ideal opportunity through his dad to understand that there's a long potential future here for someone of talent. So I think we could see a different Kevin Magnussen this time.
I want him to go through the journey that a lot of F1 guys have gone through, which is they've come to sports cars, and yes, a lot of them, first few races, they've kind of gone, oh no, here we are, look, this is my career now, I've hit this level.
Hang on a minute,
and
it's awesome.
And then actually, within a year or two, completely different prospect.
Well, and I get it, with Fernando Alonso coming in, then going back, but he's made it clear he wants to come back. He enjoyed himself. It's I feel that if this is a good fit for him, as in if the team dynamic works for him, I think you could see something quite special here, and I'm quite excited by it.
Bryn Smith, my good friend Bryn. Hi, Bryn. How are you? He wants to ask about Valentino Rossi. He says, with the entry list, this is for WC, there's no number 46 in LMGT3 from WRT. Does this mean we've seen the last of the MotoGP legend in the class?
No.
No, it does seem odd though, right? If you're not going to have the 46, it's such a part of it's so iconic that
there's all sorts of reasons why that might not have been the case. The latest information I have had from a pretty good source is I think we'll see Valentino back. Will we see him back for a full season? I don't know, but I think we will see him back in 2025 in a BMW.
The Wawa 24. We've been to Wawa.
We have.
Excellent. We love a Wawa, don't we? He says, what's the most surprising news story of the year in sports car racing for us?
It's interesting.
We had
here's
this
the
conversation
thing.
before we started recording.
We did. So here's the thing. We both work full time in this sport, this industry, this business. And things that might externally be surprising might not necessarily be that surprising to you and I. So things like the Ganassi Caddy thing, not that surprising eventually. It's a major news story. Don't make any bones about it. But that wasn't necessarily the most surprising. And I think we discussed this. And actually, the most surprising turnaround came for Lamborghini, and it came because I can recall the summer race for WEC in Imola, and you did fine work around that paddock in the wake of the two-car mandate story breaking, finding out what it was that every manufacturer was saying that would affect. So Cadillac and Isotta Fraschini. But then you got a pretty conclusive answer from Lamborghini. And at that stage, very positive.
Yeah, it was. If they're going to do the 2-car rule, we'll meet the 2-car rule. And at that point, the bigger question mark was going to be, what's the IMSA program going to be look like if we're going to carry on in WC? And at that point, there wasn't really the question. It was, we're going to develop the car, and if we need 2 cars, we'll push for it.
Yeah. Move on from that to where we were in early November and breaking that story from the Bahrain paddock, which was that Lamborghini were going to leave the WC, not just in hypercar, but also in LMGT3, in the wake of what seems to have been a pretty comprehensive fallout with Iron Lynx, with whom they'd won titles. They won in European Le Mans Series in LMGT3 this year. So for me, the most surprising story was the level that had gone wrong. From we will do the 2 cars, etc., to not only we not do the 2 cars, we're going to blame the 2-car rule, which is something fundamentally they did not say earlier in the year, to, and by the way, we're not just leaving with hypercar, but we're taking our Hurricanes with us as well. And by the way, the relationship with Iron Lynx is pretty much done. And by the way, Iron Lynx are going to be running Mercedes AMGs. And by the way, Pfaff are going to be running the Lamborghini in IMSA. And we still don't know what's going on in terms of a service provider for the GTP car, indeed whether or not there will be a short-term change there. So that whole mess, if you like, of stories, drawing together those strands. And I can remember you and I up and down the paddock in Bahrain, and it was like every single time we met back up, it was, no, it's not that, it's this. And then there's that, and what about this? And it was pulling that together over a period of 2 or 3 days was to, to use the questioned word, surprising, but pretty exhilarating as well to think, hang on a minute, you've got this strand, are they going to do that? And finding that was the case was pretty much a surprise.
The only other thing I was saying in terms of surprises this year, said about Ganassi, and that for us not being a massive surprise by the time it happened. But in the fallout of that, it did surprise me that Wayne Taylor Racing went from 2 cars with Acura, building that up, to then suddenly going back to Cadillac, and Shank coming back immediately.
Yeah.
The Shank coming back is something that I expected down the line. I expected them to sit on the sidelines, do the IndyCar thing, find a way back in.
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't expect it to be so soon. I didn't expect the Acura program to change so radically in the fallout of that.
It's astounding, isn't it, that in one decision being made, and that decision was made by Cadillac, that the ramifications, the ripples around that spread so fast and so far that did have some surprising outcomes. And to happen so soon in this cycle was another part of it. But they're the two. It was the ripples around Cadillac's decision, not linked in any way to a golden retriever, by the way. But the other one definitely was Lamborghini, and their not only the change in their decision, but the way in which they chose to communicate it, and beyond that, the pretty devastating effect that all of that had on a relationship with their global service provider.
Jerry Robert Sudoff says, what makes the Mercedes AMG GT3 such a capable car at each track in IMSA? The AMG seems to be able to contend more often at each track in the series.
It's not only an interesting question, Jerry. It's now easier for me to answer than it would have been if we'd done it last week, because in the 4 days since I sat here and spoke to Marshall Pruitt on the other side of the Atlantic, I've spent 2 of them at AMG. And what a fascinating time we've had there. And lots of stuff, by the way, to come on DSC, and I hope on Racer as well. I think it comes down to what you hear from the teams who run these cars. And what they say to you is 2 or 3 things. It's a very drivable car. It's very simple to dial yourself into for drivers of a variety of capabilities to find themselves comfortable in the car and to extract the most performance they can out of the car. It's pretty old school, big old 6.3 litre V8. Saw one of those things on the dyno at AMG. say saw it, felt it. It's like a portable earthquake machine, but an astounding piece of kit. It simply set the standard when that car came out for user friendliness, and it's something where you've seen others move pretty much technological mountains to meet that. Not least Aston Martin, a great example of it, where they realised that they got a car that professional drivers could hustle, but the non-professionals struggled with, and they spent a lot of time and energy and resource successfully transforming that car to the point where it was a lot closer to where the AMG started. So I think the answer there is, I just think they've got a stable platform that you can push and push harder. It doesn't ever look nervous.
No,
it doesn't ever look.
It suits the American style tracks, doesn't it? And it's good on tyre wear. It's good. It's one of the cars, like we were talking about earlier. It's good in GT World Challenge on the Pirellis, which is a hard nut to crack to try and get the best out of the Pirelli tyre. It's always up there in the longer endurance races, isn't it? For that reason,
it does. And I think it is this thing about increasingly in sports car racing. It's a bit like the debate we've had time and time again about balanced performance. It's not just about being the quickest. It's about staying quick for longer. And if actually what you've got is a car that is kind to the driver, you can stay quicker for longer. And I think that's just what the car does.
The Nürburgring 24 hours is the next topic of conversation, Graham, and we've got a question from Lucas Lackas. It says, do you think the N24 will see a decrease in entries next year because of the clash? Well,
yes.
It's not a clash with the Spa 24, it's held directly afterwards, isn't it? Or will it stay the same or increase with more manufacturers and coverage to support it?
No, I think it's disastrous. And
it's been a horrible year for the Nordschleife.
Well, it has. I think, the three 24-hour races in 3 weeks, it's disastrous. It's a straight answer. Talking to teams, to drivers, to team members, the professionals that make this work, I can honestly tell you that people are looking forward to it with real dread. That it's, one of these events when you're at the sharp end with it is exhausting. Now, you and I do it. I do it principally these days from a TV booth. You do it in the press room in the paddock. And you and I come away utterly spent. And we're not suffering the extremes of temperature, the absolute deprivation of sleep of, particularly a team that might have had some misfortunes in the week. And that's before you have to pack it all up on a Monday or a Sunday night, travel to another part of Europe and do it again the following weekend. And then again the following weekend. I got a fairly extreme view on this. I just think this has been a failure. I think it's been a failure of those involved in the sport to allow this to happen.
It's not easy to put a calendar together.
No, it's not.
I'll say that. It is really tricky, especially now.
And SRO have been shafted by Formula One. Make no mistake about that. But either way, put that aside. Yes, I know there are traditions with all three of these races, but at some point common sense has got to come first. The Nürburgring has got a particular problem. Not only has it got a physical link with a public holiday, the reason why that's important is because they're days off for the vast number of marshals they require to make that event happen. Without those people, and there are thousands of them, being able to have those days without pay, it couldn't happen. That's why it stuck to that date. With Le Mans pretty much is fixed. And let's be blunt, it's the biggest race in the world. There's lots of others that would actually say, there's Monaco Grand Prix, the Indy 5. Le Mans is the biggest race in the world. And it's a fixed point. I'm going to get a call or two, but I think the failure here has come from the Spa 24 Hours. Is that they've moved it to that date. To me, it's the Intercontinental GT Challenges jewel in its crown. It's its blue ribbon event, and it's a week one side of the only other 24-hour race in the IGTC calendar on the same continent.
Well, the two biggest races in the IGTC back-to-back it just seems bizarre that if you're trying to keep the IGTC relevant and interesting for manufacturers and want them to keep coming back in numbers and supporting customer teams, have the two European races. back-to-back is insane. Because the pool of teams that are going to want to do it and can do it is so small, so you're cannibalising both events by doing it.
So here's the thing. I know some of the senior managers at SRO well enough and have huge respect for them. That will not have been an easy decision. And that makes it pretty clear to me that their options were, if I'm going to say they weren't limited, they were probably nil. But either way, it's still across the board with the sport in general. And yes, I include Formula One in this. It's a failure. It's a failure to have those three races together. And why am I getting slightly aerated about it? Because I think there's risk here. I think there's risk here to the people involved. I think the fatigue means that there is more potential for there to be a problem. Either a health or a safety related problem there. Yes, I do think this is going to impact on at least one of those races, and I think the one that's most obvious for it to impact is likely to be the Nürburgring.
100%.
But
in a wider sense with the Nürburgring, the other point of this is they've had a terrible year this year with the NES and the NLS fallout, having two series going head-to-head, trying to nick each other's weather problems, marshalling problems, and one of them collapsing, as inevitably was always going to be the case. You've got NLS trying to build itself back up in 2025, make no doubt about it. It's a massive year for them to try and get back some of the grids that they used to get.
The momentum they had.
Yeah, and the momentum. But that's going to be incredibly hard if a lot of the teams know going into the season that the Nürburgring 24 Hours is a step too far for them. So the NLS races around that are going to struggle to attract the entries, and the Nürburgring 24 Hour qualifying races are going to struggle to attract the big manufacturer-backed, big customer teams in the top-class GT3 stuff. That, in turn, has a bigger impact on racing on the Nordschleife in general, because there is, and I've spoken to German colleagues about this, like Marcus Schurig, about how they make this. He is German, I've heard.
He hides it really well.
But he's said to me in the past that there is a fine line where the entry numbers, which are always around 100 cars, used to be 200 plus.
It did.
Back in the day. But they need to get somewhere around the 125 car mark for an NLS race to break even.
But then an NLS race, not the N24.
To break even.
Yeah.
So if they're going to struggle like they did at the end of the NLS season, they're struggling to even get to 100, and we've got an N24 that's going to be diluted by most teams having to focus on the Spartan 24 Hours and the guys who are spending the most money at the top, all the NLS races are going to struggle to break even next year. And that's massive for the future of racing in the Nordschleife.
It's a mess, isn't it? And make no mistake, it gives me no pleasure to say these things. I think it's a failure in the sport. I'm sorry, but, this is not pointing the finger at, an individual or an individual organisation. It's a failure in the sport to allow that to happen. It's as simple as that. There's no way we should have been here having this conversation about 3 24-hour races, 3 massive 24-hour races on consecutive weekends. That you could drive between each of them in 2 to 3 hours each.
Yeah, as a fan, it sounds fantastic until you're
No, it really isn't. It really isn't. I was talking to our mate and colleague Michael Zalavari, who was over with Daily Sports Car during a epic summer trip he made to Europe this year. I think that was that all 3 in 6 weeks?
Yeah, something like that, wasn't it?
And I don't think he ever wants to do that. He's done it once, he's loved it. Don't think he ever wants to do that again. It's just exhausting.
And one of those 24-hour races was only 6 hours long.
There you go. And, and I think thinking about that and knowing you and I have both done back-to-back 24-hour races before now, and that was no fun. Was no fun. And I'm worried. I'm genuinely worried by it as to, the health and the safety of friends and colleagues. And I hope I'm wrong. But I think I'm not.
Let's talk about Genesis and new GT3 cars. So Cross Main says, I heard during the launch of the Genesis LMDH program that there was a possible GT3 component as well. Is it still being talked about, or is it on ice for now?
Well, you were there, and I think that question was asked.
Yeah, they were asked a couple of times about the potential to enter GT3, and essentially they gave non-committal answers. I do think that there is an element where they are interested in getting into GT3 marketplace. I think it would make sense for them, but right now I don't think there's any immediate prospect. I think Cyril Abitable spoke to to us and to select reporters after the launch, and his words were, there's so many factors that go into this. The key is, have you got the right car? Have you got the right performance car in your model range that you want to show off a GT3 car? And Genesis don't know the answer yet.
Okay. I think the answer comes down to this. Are they looking and evaluating? I think they've looked and evaluated. Well, I know they've looked and evaluated it, literally everything. It's a real privilege to see that they've alighted on Hypercar and GTP, for starters. They're not going to miss the opportunity to evaluate the potential for a customer racing platform, because that's something that can help you to fund your factory programs. But you're right. It basically comes down to, is there at the moment a platform they can use for GT3? The answer is no, there isn't. So maybe in the future.
Zach Anderson, in a wider sense, asked, are there any new manufacturers looking at building a GT3 homologated car? Several are making new models or dropping out, but are there any looking at joining the party? Beyond Genesis.
I've heard of one. And it was one that initially counted out the prospect of a GT3 car, but since then...
Lada?
No. Begins with L, though. Counted out the prospect of a GT3 car, but I've heard since then that perhaps they have evaluated it, not up to date yet as to just exactly whether or not they can/will come forward. That's Lotus. Now, they have had a GT3 car before in the very early days with the supercharged Exige.
Got a GT4.
They've got a GT4, and it's the GT4 platform, I think, that initially we were told, no, it doesn't suit it for a variety of reasons. But I think they've taken a look. I genuinely don't expect that will happen, is the honest answer. Is there anybody else? Well, I think there's one out there, and I'm not absolutely sure who it is the straight and honest answer. I think there's one out there. There were some rumblings around the Spa 24 Hours that this might not be all that we see. There's one obvious one that you could say, with a platform they've already got, could do it, and that's Maserati.
Yeah.
The GT2 car, has a platform that certainly could be adapted to GT3. Are Maserati interested in doing it? It appears not. So we just have to see what emerges from this.
It's going to be interesting with the future of GT3, though, as a platform, because getting a major manufacturer, any of the manufacturers that are not currently involved in it, to justify coming into doing GT3 racing now is such a harder sell than it might have been 5 years ago, because the future of road car and automotive technology is changing so quickly, and GT3 is not a million miles away from being almost a dinosaur.
Well,
no hybrid power, no electrification really on like an actual
and this
concrete
continues
roadmap.
to surprise me that there is not a roadmap for that at all. I get it. I understand why, but
Because of the cost.
But the reality is, pretty much every platform. Well, what have we got now? Is it 2 or 3? It's 3 cars now, isn't it? Because the NSX, which is now effectively leaving the international stage, available only as a hybrid.
Yeah.
The 296, it's
The
a
next
hybrid.
Lamborghini,
The next
yeah.
Lamborghini is a hybrid. Already we're having to accommodate, in terms of a GT3 racing platform, technology, or rather powertrain solutions which are not available on the road car. That includes, by the way, cars that are marketed as four-wheel drive cars. They're only available as two-wheel drive cars as a GT3 car, that you then end up with special editions of those cars as two-wheel drive cars for the road. So, you say dinosaur-like, it's not that much of an exaggeration, is the honest answer. It is pretty old school. They're pretty awesome, but...
the worry from like FIA and, because they obviously control it, but the SRO as well, is that if you're going to go down that route, you've got to get it right, because if it gets... It's already way too expensive, GT3 racing, to the point where people are worried to the level they probably were 10 years ago when we got to that point we thought, GT3 racing isn't going to go bang. They're worried that if they went down that route, it could just erupt.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden, customer teams aren't going to have the funds.
Well, I mean, we're seeing this contraction of manufacturers into it. I mean, we've gone down from, 12, 13 active manufacturers. Bentley have gone. Nissan effectively gone. Honda now. Audi, maybe another year with the existing cars, but the last new car has now been sold. But even there, they won a race yesterday, the Golf 12 Hours. But, so you're losing manufacturers. It doesn't mean to say we're short. There's still, 8, 9 manufacturers still active at a more than reasonable level. The latest addition, of course, was Ford. But, one of the big... When I sit and think...
My worry is that all this comes to a tipping point at the point where LMP2 needs to change and the point where we get into the next iteration of LMP3, and it all happens at once, and it could just go horribly wrong. It could go really well.
Yeah, but you mentioned...
We're heading to a point.
Exactly those tipping points, which is... These are big decisions to make. Now, with LMP2, we sort of know what the options on the table are.
Yeah.
Okay. I think most people would agree that they're pretty clear what the options that are going to happen are going to be with LMP2. With GT3, it's pretty much shut down as a conversation whenever relevance of technology comes forward. And that is a concern.
Yeah.
That is a concern.
Yeah. Final part of the podcast. Some fun topics.
Hang on. Now you've got one more.
Oh, hang on. What? Dustin Slade's just come in. He's asking about torque sensors. He says, is there any updates on the implementation of torque sensors from the Daytona test?
Yes, the answer is they'll be implemented into the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship in GTD and GTD Pro this coming season, as was always the case. So, I had a conversation, again, with Mercedes-AMG about this over the weekend. They weren't at that test. No particular reason why not, other than it wasn't on their test schedule. They will be testing, I think they're testing already this month at Daytona. They're the last of those available manufacturers that hadn't had active race experience with torque sensors, in everybody else's case, in LMGT3 format. Good to go.
So, final part of the podcast.
Does it say fun there?
The fun questions.
Fun.
We'll be the judge of that.
We will be the judge of that.
Yes. Duncanito says, can you tell us some what-if stories about LMH and LMDH? Like, for example, teams that have almost become factory teams for manufacturers instead of a current one. There's a few that come to mind, but a lot of them is like, I can't really say that.
Thing is, we can't on that front. Yes, there are, and multiple stories. A couple that have said... recent conversation with Sasha Fassbender at Inter-Europol tells me they came very close to a deal with a hypercar/GTP manufacturer, and I have no reason to disbelieve that. So these things are going on all the time. Generally speaking, you're not going to get a manufacturer coming in for the most part and going, it's this team and nobody else. They'll be looking at the whole marketplace. And the second that the marketplace understands that level of a program is available, that's the point at which big fat brown envelopes full of stuff, and I don't mean cash, stuff, start arriving, and they'll be getting surprised by the number of teams that say they've got the capability to run those programs, because this is the golden goose for a professional race team. But actually, surprisingly, few of them have actually got the capability and the heritage to be able to prove it.
We know that. Well, we can talk about WRT had the Audi deal, didn't they?
Yes,
and then that went away, and that kind of delayed them getting back into WEC in the hypercar class, and they ended up with BMW in the end. There was that fun story that Sam Hignett from Jota gave us when we were at the Jota base.
Oh, this is back to LMP1 days, isn't it?
Yeah, this is the LMP1, the Aston Martin AMR1 LMP1 program that never was, that Jota had placed orders for cars before it became very clear that wasn't a very good car.
Now, here's the thing. I remember going to ProDrive around that time when they'd had the first test. It was becoming pretty clear that things were not going well with that car. And
was that at the launch that you thought things were not going very well with that car?
No, it's a bit beyond that. So the two factory cars were in the workshop at ProDrive, the old workshop at ProDrive. And they showed me around the rest of the facility, and sure as eggs is eggs. There were multiple tubs for the MR1 ready to go to what at that stage was a defined list of customers. Okay, clearly we now know that Jota was one of those customers. So there's all sorts of stories to be uncovered in sports car racing. it's only fairly recently that one of the other great what-ifs of sports car racing, Peugeot's abortive 2012 programme in the WEC with the 908 Hybrid 4. And it's been a close to decade-long push to find out who the drivers were that year. And the latest one we found out about was Jean-Carl Vernet was supposed to be there. Olivier Pla was supposed to be there. Marino Franchitti was supposed to be there. I was talking to someone who was sitting on the plane with Marino on the way
As you
there.
found out.
Literally, as he got off the plane and turned his phone back on, and immediately the stuff got, and he literally went downstairs and got on a plane back to the UK. I've turned up from the UK for my brand new job. I'm going to Sebring. Oh no, I'm not. I'm going back to the UK.
Bye.
Yeah, and that it could be that simple. But there are a gazillion stories, and if we told you these stories, those people would never talk to us again.
There's one in particular.
There's one in particular
that is a zinger. It's an absolute zinger.
Absolute zinger.
But sorry, lads.
That'll have to wait for my book when I retire and die.
Stephen Warner says, "Hi Graham, what are you and Marshall's favourite Group C cars and why?"
Well, unfortunately, MP not with us. You've got a favourite.
You could guess for Marshall's though. What would you guess is Marshall? You know Marshall pretty well.
A Group C car.
Yeah.
He was very keen.
IMSA GTP, wasn't
he was very, very keen. Forget the GTP cars, but the Group C cars, he was very keen on the early XJR Jaguars. Very keen on them. But I think that's a podcast in its own right. But we'll ask you. Come on, you're there. Never saw them in period.
It's hard because I don't have a relationship with any of those cars. The only one is the Jag.
Which one?
The one winner from '88.
Okay, the XJR9.
That was my granddad's favourite car. So he went to Le Mans just to see that car, very much in the same way that you went to Le Mans to see the McLaren.
Yeah.
So that's always been the car. I grew up knowing about that car, but I didn't know anything about Le Mans at the time. But yeah, I don't really have a connection. I've never been one of the tub thumpers who's like Group C was the best. We need to go back to Group C. It was so much cooler than anything else that's ever happened. It's never been me.
Just too damn young.
It was all Porsches. It was all Porsches.
So okay, Jaguar for the mould breaking aspects of it, the XJR9, the XJR12. The Saubers were a force of nature. The sound of those things was absolutely unreal.
Toyotas
of a range of Toyotas. But here's the thing: much as the 3.5 litre series, 3.5 litre formula destroyed Group C, by God, those cars were something to watch and to watch and to hear and to experience. And for me, if you held a gun to my head, the Jaguar XJR14, the Vita, it was just
the old purple one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh,
Ross Brawn.
Yeah, I've seen that race around Brands actually.
Absolutely amazing piece of kit. Big fan, by the way. Not everybody's a big fan of the 905 Peugeots. Loved those cars. Thought they were spectacular as well. But the Jag was such a leap forward at the time.
The sound of the Mazda as well. Hearing that go, I mean, just the noise alone. 787B is an icon, isn't it?
But if it was me, let's put it this way: if you ask me the question, right, Graham, you can have a 1/18th model of any Group C car put in front of you right now. It's yours to keep.
For Christmas for me.
I'll tell you right now that this one would be pricey. But it would be the XJR14. You just said you have no emotional link to those cars. I do, and that's probably the one. But pretty close second and third would be the C9 Sauber and I'd go the XJR9 rather than the 12 Jag as well. But an amazing era, but for wholly different reasons of the amazing era we're living now. And I'll say this, I think, Dustin, I am getting to be a bit of an old git. I could not be prouder and more enthused to be directly involved in this era right now. I'm having an absolute ball. I'm loving my professional life because it's not difficult to find positivity in our sport now, and sometimes that's not been the case. And actually going to the big race meetings now, and you coming back after a couple of years away, Stephen, what a buzz.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, it's what we always dreamed of, isn't it? And it's come true.
It has indeed.
Speaking of dreams that might come true, Crippled Potato, get well soon, says...
So it wasn't just, it was Stephen. Sorry, Stephen. A different Stephen.
What's on your wish list from Santa this year? Is there any particular merch or memorabilia you've been waiting to get your hands on? And have you been nice enough this year for Santa to deliver it?
I'm going to be a real softie here, and there's only one thing I want for Christmas this year, and that is...
2 front teeth?
No. It is 2 weeks for Trudy. That's it. This has been a long and tough year for so many reasons, but so much travel. I don't think I've... Other than the COVID years where everything was exhausting, I don't think I've been as tired for as long as I have been this year. And my last trip out of the UK was just yesterday, and I'm looking forward to a couple of weeks with some good food and drink in the cupboard and the fridge, and decent TV, and hopefully good enough weather to walk the energy out the Mad Husky. And genuinely, that's what I want for Christmas. I'm a lucky boy. I'm surrounded in the office we're sitting in now by things I love, things on the wall that I love, books on the shelf that I love, models on the shelves that I love. And it's family time. That's what it's always been to me. I'm one of 7 children in my family. And Christmas was always about family. It was always about everybody getting together, and you had a bit of family-related chaos and carnage, but it's always been about that. And by the way, wherever you are in the world, I hope that for all of you as well. I hope you do have a fun and peaceful Christmas, and I hope that if Santa does bring you something, I genuinely hope, it's a Porsche 963 and not a Van Wall. Love you, Colin. What about you?
I can't really follow that up and say I want a PlayStation. This heartfelt Christmas monologue drags on for half an hour.
Here you go. Over to you, son.
Starts on a high, ends on a high.
I just put this point in this chalice. There you go.
Yeah. It is one of those. This year has been absolutely insane. Like, it has been an absolute...
I'll tell you what you want for Christmas.
Go on.
You want the time to finish the present I bought you for your birthday.
Yeah, I want the time to finish off the work that we've got to do before Christmas Day.
It is that thing around... I always looked forward at Christmas, back in the years where people gave me presents, to opening something that I could relax with. Whether or not that's, I don't know, a puzzle of some sort, I'm looking in the office at the moment at the astonishing Lego stuff that my brother bought me for my 60th birthday earlier this year. It's a time for, it's your last Christmas as a single man.
Yeah.
Because Stephen is getting married to the lovely Carolyn this coming year, and that's a nice...
She's got to work Christmas Day.
She's got to work... That is brutal.
Christmas Day, which means she doesn't have to put up with me on Christmas Day.
Here's the thing. When you set out in a career as an elf, that's oh, sorry, it's the National Elf Service.
The National Elf Service. That's class.
But I just hope whatever you guys and girls get there, that it just is something you can relax with and enjoy.
I want the NASA Discovery set. That's the Lego one.
The
Discovery Shuttle.
Do you?
Yeah. Santa, please.
Plot spoiler, not a chance. So that's it from us. Yes, we've both been nice enough this year to get exactly where we want. And
doesn't feel like it though, does it? Christ.
No. But we're going to finish this one. This is not going to be, by the way, the final Twisk of the year. As I said, we will be putting out some stuff on social media with a bit of a review of the year show. And if Marshall's well enough to take part in that, I hope it will be Marshall, myself and Stephen to look at some of the highs and the lows of a quite astounding 2024. For now, though, thanks, Boot, for being with us through this year. Thanks again to Daniel Summersgill for putting these questions together. Thanks to all of you for submitting some really fun questions this week and every week that we've had the energy to send them out. He's been Stephen Kilbey. I've been Graham Goodwin. We're going to say thank you again to the Sports Car Club of Canada, to Pfaff Technologies, to the Justice Brothers, and to TorontoMotorsports.com. This has been the Week in Sports Cars. It's been part of the Marshall Pruitt podcast series, and we will be with you just before Christmas next week.